So I give R-Type a lot of credit in solidifying what stage design becomes in 4x3 games. Taking those core qualities defined by Gradius and flipping Xevious' air and ground units horizontally, and amping up that importance of the stage design, and how enemy layouts and their bullet types work in tandem with that environment. However, the bullet revolution in 4x3, it wasn't spawned by R-Type. All these games, they were still using really dinky, basic single shots. So, it comes after 87, right? In this new 16-bit era, on proprietary boards made by Konami, Taito, and on newer consoles, the SNES and the Genesis, they're bringing this experience. They're trying to compete with the arcades. They don't want to just hang around with Rekka anymore. And I didn't play these games when they came out. I was a Dreamcast era and 64 era person. The games I played were newer. But I go back and look at these games. They were trying to bring this arcade experience, these things that were equivalent to games that you could play in coin-op. And this is what's important for 16-bit games. This is the era where they decide, we had R-Type, we had Gradius, we had Darius. Can we push this forward? And all designers in all games, but especially horizontal games, they try to develop on this problem of readability on the horizontal axis. That doesn't happen in vertical games. The main argument for danmaku's success, it lies squarely in how natural it is for the eye to read complex bullet patterns coming down the screen vertically. I've already talked about this. It's in my other video. I talk about this all the time, but it's important to really bring this up. For some reason or another, we're just geared towards identifying these patterns in this aspect ratio, right? They come down, it's easy to read, it's like rain. You don't read rain sideways. When a truck comes to hit you on the side of the road, you don't see it coming. If the truck was coming down at you, you'd be like, oh, I see it now, and it's too late. You're going to get hit anyway. But, it just might be this inverse, this breadth versus depth problem, 4x3 and 16x9, breadth, I've talked about this already, breadth allows for, a longer aspect ratio, you see more, right? You see more in your periphery. Whereas in a more squashed, more square situation, which kind of do we see in 16x9? I'm not really sure. When you're focused in on a square, you tend to look in more than outward. And when that square, 4x3 isn't perfectly square. I made this comment about 4x3 being a square. It appears square because of how the games are designed with the CRTs and everything. They made them squarish. But generally, when a 4x3, when it's 3x4 in a vertical game, it tends to be cropped on the sides, and so it'll always appear longer than wider. The breadth of this longer aspect ratio, when it's placed vertically, right, it reduces the amount of space a person needs to focus on, right? It's tighter focus, it allows for easier concentration and readability. There's a bit of complexity to this, it's a simple topic. There's a bit of complexity to what is a simple to get. Wow, this is a tongue twister. There's a bit of complexity to what is simple to get about a complex topic that is really superficial. I wrote this shit. Why did I write this? So let's use something not complex. Okay, I take that back. It's not that simple. So, why not under defeat? This is actually a pretty good example, because despite there being many bullets on the screen, I always maintain that under defeat is not really a complex game. Well, if you're fighting the final boss and does that thing where it shoots the bullets and they come back from off screen, that's hard. But what I mean more is, like, it's not like Mushihime-sama, it's not a bullet hell. It's not danmaku. The game is hard, right? It's not easy, but the screen fills because you're delaying killing enemies for score. If you killed everything speed kill-wise, it wouldn't fill up that much, but because of the way you played the game, it tends to fill up with a lot of bullets, especially if you watch a lot of replays and be wowed by how many bullets are on the screen, when it's really not really that bad. You're kind of routing around it. See, it's mostly built up from aimed and straight shots, with those straight shots being determined by enemy position. Enemies tend to move, and they might move towards the player position, so these straight shots are never really straight, in the sense that they are straight, but more in the place that they spawn is not. It goes back to the Galagan thing. Wow. And so, we're back to Galaga. These games, they have this very simple dichotomy of straight shots and aim shots, and enemies move, they fly across the screen, they shoot shots. Mentioned already, this is the core of arcade games, This includes platformers and running gun games. Straight and aimed are the essential to getting the player move around the screen. And having all aim shot, or inversely all straight shot, only focuses on half of the potential of a game using bullets. Horizontal games always had the advantage of having a landscape as a playfield where, danmaku and more vertical games in general don't really. And most games in 4x3 can be enjoyable with basic bullet patterns, as long as the stage and formation design is interesting. Ironically though, danmaku's success comes from removing the limitations of that landscape, because, less obstacles means more complex patterns. So, where Progear failed, and this is a topic we'll discuss, Cave actually subverted that failure into success. Xevious had different bullet types than just straight named. It did have a fan kind of spread shot, but it wasn't really until the 90s that these concepts were really properly developed, and 3 types of patterns became standard additions to the straight named. I will call this fan, spray, a radial, which is a circular shot, and plume. I mostly decide these based on how they appear in 4x3, but they exist the same in 3x4 and vertical games outside of the plume, which is more of a vertical thing that comes from Gradius. Now, this isn't a design or retrospective video, so I'm not really going to be clinical about this. I'm just going to give some examples and move on, because this is more a philosophical question. Fan and radial, they both appear in vertical games. The vertical forms of fan and radial shots tend to be more interpretations in a different format, right? The way fan and radial are used in horizontal games is much more related to the stage design, whereas how they're used in vertical games is more related to the fact that the screen's open. There's plenty of space for these things. Fan itself, it's probably the most basic way of expanding that single straight shot, like in Xevious again. It moves out in odd number groupings, 3 or 5 normally, and usually it's based on an initial linkable middle shot, sometimes shot straight, sometimes aimed. And the way it's aimed can be used to disrupt the player, to force movement, or to lock them in. Radial, it's an extension of the fan, but it's less focused on a single angle. It's more focused on expanding out from a certain position, maybe moving in a specific pattern at a different rotation. Often, it's an additional shot that provides noise that the player has to move around. Plume, as I said before, comes from Gradius. It's the volcano in Gradius is really the first appearance of this type of shot. However, the volcano is more of an obstacle. When Plume really enters the vocabulary of bullet patterns, it becomes much more of a moving target that creates extra noise from the bottom of the screen from these landscape elements. And, there's a variation of this later on, which is a scattered chaff, or like a chaff shot. Whereas Plume might have an arc chaff, the chaff is more of a spread, it explodes outwards. And they tend to be random, or at least they're seeded a certain way that creates random aspects. And the concept of these things, it's like in what developed to become danmaku. These can be overlapped, and that's what creates the beginnings of the bullet hell formula. Whereas instead of single fast shots, like in Raiden, the shots might not be as fast, but they're gonna be overlapping at certain points. And the core development of these bullet patterns from the vertical to horizontal space is, just like in danmaku, a good design is not about pattern complexity in itself, but more about the points in which they overlap. You can have bad overlapping pattern design. It's very easy. You can also have bad landscape overlapping design. The player's pace should be the main objective of determining the pattern design. It shouldn't just be the pattern is complex because it's thick. And so, when we think about bullet patterns in horizontal games, they're extensions of formation design. And by extension, formation design is an extension of stage design. Stage design is incredibly important. When there's no stage design around, as in some of the more touhou-inspired danmakus, there's a freedom to design all matters of fantastic and opaque patterns. Zun's work itself, it's the slow transformation of danmaku into bullet patterns that are themselves puzzles. Not in the Ikaruga is a puzzle game sense, but in the sense that, like, in a genre that once used bullets as a direct contextual challenge determined by stage design and formation design, his stages slowly just start fading away. I think, like in the PC98 games, there's actually stage design.
Look, bats! Look! Enemies that aren't little angel things. There's actually animated bats, and they're cool looking. And they come in. You can see where they're coming in. All cool. The backgrounds are actually in-world, so you got these columns. We're like in a cave right now, hence the bats. Like, there's actual, like, narrative woven into the backgrounds in a way that's more cohesive with the world and not just an FMV.
And then by, like, 10, it just becomes like some fairies will pop it and fire some stuff, and then the boss appears. There's not really that much in terms of stage design. There's some stuff that appears, but he slowly becomes more focused on boss design, and the games create a certain stasis because there's no background, there's no really interesting or deep enemy overlapping formations. And I'm not a Touhou player, so I can take heat for that. That's completely fine. And all the patterns and all the formation concepts that gets backloaded to bosses, and bosses become more important. He essentially is just making a boss rush game with little, like, parts in between. It's certainly, like, why me, I only played Imperishable Knight and Material Missing Power, and I always found the Shoot the Bullet to be my preferred Touhou game, because the gameplay and scoring really meld well with that design philosophy, and due to the mechanic, Zun removed all that extra stage stuff, so it doesn't mean much. The game can be purely static in its purest form, and the mechanics take advantage of that by allowing you to eat away at all this garbage that fills your screen. The sort of opaqueness of the pattern itself is part of the mechanic. Part of the reason I'm making these videos about horizontal games and really just aspect ratio in general, despite it being a aesthetic argument in an era of 16:9 and hyper widescreen gaming, I'm always going to be aesthetically biased. These videos are a way for me to tackle, philosophically, like, what makes a game interesting, right? What is it? And I'm not gonna like open up a game in itself and just discuss that, because it's a bit dry and not really useful. But more just thinking about what are my experiences with these things, and what do I think matters and is long lasting from things I enjoy. Because often, when we get to this problem of what is a Euro game, right, or what is the Euro shmup, what are the things that these developers philosophically find more important than others? And again, I often said Euro shmup players and designers are more interested in platforming. They're interested in physics. They're interested in, to some degree, a lot of platforming stage design, and they're not really as interested in enemies and bullet patterns, which is, why some of those, was it Raptor Call of the Shadows or something? That game has like no bullet patterns. They just fly straight and they shoot straight and that's it. And I talk a lot about, I dislike Touhou or I dislike danmaku. I don't hate these games. I enjoy. I love cave games. I'm not like. I don't think I'm interested in playing like DFK. I've never played it, but I'm not gonna look at. I never looked at DFK and said I'm not gonna play this game. I love Esperade. I love Guwange. I love Mushihime-sama. I waited years for MAME to be able to emulate Mushihime-sama. I remember when the first emulation for MAME for that game was available, and when the cores were out, I was like, finally, I can play this game that I only saw videos of. My issue is not with danmaku games. My issue is with the concept of the flattening, the monoculture of games into one philosophy. It has to be danmaku. I don't hate Euro games. I don't hate asteroids games. I don't hate these space shooters, these floaty games. I like all of these games because we want these games to exist. We want many types of games to come in. What was great about the 90s, Taito, Konami, Cave, Compile, Capcom, Rising, all of these, and then we had, all of the console games coming out. All of these people had different philosophies, different ways of thinking about, well, what do we do that comes from that root source? And the more we get closer to danmaku, as sort of like the only way, which unfortunately a lot of people, I love them, great players, great, done a lot for shooters, but I mean, it's not it. There's more. There can be more, and we should philosophically allow for that. We should do that. So that's why I this video's not great, and they're more just kind of philosophical waffling again. I'm trying to cover things as best as I can, but I just want to offer a wide variety of what makes 4x3 in so many different ways so fun, so interesting. Why are horizontal games? Why do I like these games more than most 3x4 arcade games, vertical games, right? I still like them. I think I love Batrider. I'm probably not going to clear Batrider because I just don't put time into it, and I'm not good at reading the screen. Actually, I'm better at. When I first played Progear, I was better at Progear than I was at Batrider. I got to stage 4 in Progear. I was like, damn, not bad. I couldn't get to stage 4 on my first runs in Esperade or Guwange. No way. Even Mushi 1.5 when I play, I'm usually I'm not that good. I'm not playing around the screen, but when I play Progear, I'm fine. So it's a philosophical thing for me. These are the games I love, and I want this style of game to always exist. And that's why I'm afraid of people not being interested in these games or not really caring. How many views does a Border Down video get for 60? 8K maybe? And how many views does, a Mushihime-sama video get, There's so much more draw to the spectacle, and Crimson Clover is great. It's an amazing game, but if another Crimson Clover was never made ever again, I'd be fine with it. I know many people wouldn't. They would want more of that style of game. But if a game like that never came out ever again, but a different game came out that was completely different, I'd be fine with it. And I think people should be too. And that's why I want people to play all kinds of games and see all kinds of games for what they are. Every game has an approach. People have a certain philosophical attitude to why they design things. Why is the screen laid out? Why this? Why are people overlapping these patterns? Why do they use these patterns, right? And I want people to think about that critically instead of just saying, oh, well, put up a bullet wall there, put some stuff, you do these cave patterns, just do that. Don't teach people just to do what Cave does, Teach people to look at what everybody does and say, well, maybe there's something here that I like and something here that I like. Because you know what? I like Border Down and I like Progear. In these games, These are such, that's the beautiful distinction. Metal Black can exist at the same time that ZX can exist at the same time, and we can have R-Type 3 at the same time that we have Thunder Force 2, right? There's just so many different ways of imagining what games can be, and that's why people don't play one game and make that one game your life. Play many games and learn many things and say, oh, so there's so many ways. The arcade is so vast. There's so much more to the arcade than I first thought. That's what I want people to do and to experience and to enjoy. Still, though, Progear is a special game. There's something about Progear that just... You see Progear and you're just like, I want to play that game. That game looks awesome. Even though there's no physicality to the stages in Progear, that doesn't mean that the stages aren't there. The thing about horizontal games in 4x3, and this is why it's really important to really zone in on Progear, just like to zone in on Border Down or R-Type or anything. The stage, whether it's physical or not, whether it's a real thing, the thing is, in a horizontal game, the stage is a function. The stage, whether or not it's real, whether or not there are boxes, the stage determines everything. It is the contextual reason for bullet patterns, for enemy placement, for spacing. In a vertical game, in a compile game, you can just have things come down, right? And things come down on the screen, right? They just come down and they shoot and they leave. Touhou, this is why I don't like Touhou. Touhou has no context for anything. Touhou is purely bullets. But in Progear, just like in earlier games, the screen itself becomes a reason for things. I said it before, in 4x3, because you're working with a box, rather than in a vertical game, which is 3x4, you have a rectangle. Because in 4x3 you have the box, you need to make sure every single aspect of your game is not just a hallway. The 4x3 game is an optical illusion. You need to make the player feel like, despite the fact that they're looking at a box, that this game has verticality, that it has depth, that it has horizontality, that there is more to it than just what they see on the screen with their eyes. And many games in the past, in the 16-bit era and beyond, have tried to deal with this. For some games with R-Type stage, it's about moving the camera. For other games like Thunder Force or for Gradius or whatever, it's about what you see on the screen is only just a small part of it. You can move up and down and grow and move the screen. Progear has this same kind of thing, this same kind of question, is that we are making a game, we're not moving the camera, or the camera's stable, and we have no landscape, but we have backgrounds. Cave has backgrounds. Cave always has had backgrounds. And so, in Progear, the question is, well, how can we use the screen space effectively? Horizontal design is, and always should be, contextual. And the reason why it works in Progear despite not having a landscape is that the bullet patterns are always contextual. And it also helps that they're probably some of the most beautiful, breathtaking patterns in any danmaku game ever made. Like, no danmaku game, I don't care how difficult the patterns are or whatever, or how opaque they are, like in Touhou, or the patterns. The most beautiful bullet patterns in shooting games, they're in Progear. It's the first among. It's probably. It's why it's such a shame that this is the game, and there's a cult now. There's a cult that loves this game, but like, it's just a shame. This is the one Cave game that people don't play.